record. All right, so this is September 2023, and we're going over the class I'm doing is on neuro disorders, neurodevelopmental disorders, and we're just going to talk a little bit about what that means, like where it comes from, and then, maybe, what you see in kids or as an adult if you carry one of these diagnoses. So I'm going to go ahead and share the screen. And go right into this. So I'm Kathleen King, Reliable RN, and this is Neurodevelopmental Disorders. I always share this. I have no financial relationships to disclose. I do have a nurse coaching business, and my goal only is to introduce individuals to how nurse coaching can positively impact your life. And also, I'd like to give people a knowledge base so that they can more actively engage with their medical professionals so that they can have meaningful discussions when they do see them. So we'll get right into this. Expected developmental milestones. So this is really where it all starts, because we're talking about disorders that have to do with your actual development from in the womb through to age 2, 4, 6, things like that. So all children are different and they reach milestones at different ages. However, research supports looking at early intervention if parents or pediatricians are concerned about some delays. Like, I know when my brother was little, he didn't speak till age 3. That's very unusual, and it didn't actually end up being any sort of developmental issue. But in the current world we live in, if you had a baby that wasn't cooing, wasn't making verbal noises by age 1, you're probably going to be referred to early intervention, and they're going to start to look at, are we hitting these important milestones? So, do you hold your head and neck up? At 8 weeks, they should be able to prone, right? Rolling by 3 to 18 weeks. Grasping, pulling at things. Are they grabbing things? Sitting up. Can they sit up? And, does that work for them? Standing, all that kind of stuff. So I just wanted to mention that these days, I see, Craig, that these days we're pretty on, it's my mom, it's okay. We're on top of these milestones and we do pay attention to them. All right, so what's the definition? Neurodevelopmental disorders are neurologically based conditions that interfere with the acquisition, retention, or application of specific skills or sets of information, right? So somebody who's dyslexic might have problems acquiring new learning or applying it, like their spelling might be atrocious. Their B's and D's are reversed. If somebody has dyslexia with numbers, that's a different problem altogether. So these disorders may cause interference with attention, memory, perception. Craig, did I start recording this? Did you get
Yes.
Did you get something that said I was recording?
Yes.
Good. Okay. Problem solving or social interaction. These disorders may be mild and easily manageable with behavior and educational interventions, or they might be very severe, and the child might need significant supports. All right, so most developmental disabilities are caused by or dealt with, they're thought to be caused by a complex mix of factors. So genetics certainly can play a role, but so can parental health behaviors during pregnancy. Is the mom smoking? Was she using alcohol? Complications during birth. Unfortunately, some ID, so some intelligent deficits are due to asphyxiation or lack of oxygen during birth. Infections, the mom, if the mom got an infection during pregnancy, it could affect how the baby is developed. infections the baby might have early on in life. I think if you grew up in my time period, you would know that Mary Ingalls in the Little House on the Prairie series ends up getting scarlet fever and going blind, right? We don't have that type of issue now, but there are actually infections that the baby might have early on in life that could cause neuro damage. High levels of environmental toxins such as lead. We know lead exposure to children under the age of 3 is catastrophically awful. And there's no coming back from it. You can't recover the loss of brain cells. And any early childhood trauma. So we see this for children who are in foster care or have been neglected or horribly abused, right? So that's what we call early childhood trauma. But the other thing that I just want to point out is often we don't know an exact reason. There's not necessarily a cause, and there's not necessarily a, we can point to this happened and this is why your child has this. Sometimes it is just a cruel twist of fate kind of thing, like it's nothing that we can even trace back. This is a very big, busy picture, but what's going on in the brain and or the nervous system. So this is where we talk about this, see how it's genetic, it's toxics, tetragenic is environmental, that's basically poison, idiopathic, infections, hypoxic anemia, hypoxic events, traumatic events. And this is what it ends up with. So it could lead to cognitive issues. So poor language skills, poor verbal IQ, problem-solving issues, motor manifestations. It could mean that they have poor tone, they can't grab things, their coordination is poor. Neurobehavior, so attention becomes a problem. Impulse control might be a problem. Self-injury, mood regulation, that's a big deal. Neuroanatomical issues, that is, so microencephalopathy is a smaller brain than normal. Macro is too big. Structural abnormalities, so something going on in the brain that is maybe causing seizures. Maybe you have your neurons are not aligned the way we normally expect them to be. And this is just, there's lots of different areas in the brain that affect, that if they get damaged or if they're affected during development, this is where you would mostly see it. So somebody with motor issues, it's kind of the top of the brain. Autism is kind of back here, actually. Any sort of coordination, the base of the spine. Okay.
Are we talking about the dementia and stuff like that?
Say that one more time.
Are we talking about dementia or Alzheimer's at all?
No, because that can happen over time. This is more talking about how the brain is developed. So here, let me go back a slide. Let me see if I can go back a slide. The areas are the same, right? So if you were talking about somebody with dementia, that speech apraxia area is still the speech area. Motor apraxia is still kind of motor areas. But when you normally for dementia, it's an overall diminishing. The brain is actually shrinking and you're losing brain cells. It's a little different. This is during development, are the neurons firing in the right places in the brain? And in order to diagnose this, they do neurodevelopment tests. They do a battery of IQ subtests. They have academic subtests. They check the background of the parents. They might check, they might go through, okay, so what did the child look like at a week old? What they look like at a month old? What do they look like at a year old? So we're going to go through the background of the family. Where have you been living? Hello, Bev. I'm glad you could join us. Where have you been living? What possibly could have affected your development? Are you in an area where there's lead? Has anybody been doing lead testing? This is how you kind of start to diagnosis. It's not an easy diagnosis. Anybody who's had ADD or ADHD or even autism spectrum, it's not an easy diagnosis. And a lot of times it takes extra time to be able to figure it out. This is just a listing of the different types, of what we kind of consider our childhood neurodevelopmental disorders. So learning disabilities. Bev, are you trying to talk to me? Oh, I wasn't sure. I didn't hear you. Learning disabilities, 5 to 10% of our kids might have that. ADHD, we see it about 7%. Tourette's is like a tick. Like that's a very physical one. Tourette's is a or they do it with their tick with, I mean a tick with their hands, their head, sometimes with their speech. Autism and other PDD, that's called pervasive developmental disorders. And that just means their entire development is going to be slowed down. So if you expect a child to roll over at 4 months or 5 months, this child might not roll over till a year and a half. And again, they might need some extra support. Down syndrome is a part of this. Rett syndrome, which is actually, there's a very small amount of people that have that, but it's just a devastating disorder. But it causes contractions, and so that's all. Seizure disorders would be somebody who just has seizures. Nobody knows why they have seizures. They use medicines to try to contain them. There's a couple of other things they can do, but seizure disorder would fall under this because seizures have to do with your neurosystem. All right. So this is the picture that I started this whole discussion with, and it's comorbidities are the rule, not the exception. So in the center, in the big circles, ASD is autism spectrum disorder. ADHD is attention deficit hyperactivity. Motor and tic disorders, that's like Tourette's. Language, communication disorders, dyslexia would come under that. And ID, those are intellectual disabilities. So somebody with a lower IQ. Down syndrome would fall under that. Those are bad enough. Those 5, all by themselves, are bad enough. But look at the outside circles. The issue is people with these 5 diagnoses often have additional diagnoses on this outside. So what we see, ADHD kids have a high likelihood of drug and alcohol misuse disorder. Right? That means that they're using drugs and alcohol to try to help their ADHD symptoms. They might have anxiety. For somebody with intellectual disabilities, obesity is often on the table, in part because they are not as prone to being active. They're also not as prone to be as knowledgeable or sensitive to eating habits. Autism spectrum disorder runs the whole gamut. They could be having seizures and nobody really knows. They could be having seizures and we know. Aggression, as they get older, aggression might become part of the frustration for somebody with autism spectrum disorder. If they're high on the spectrum, it might be hard to not be able to communicate well with people. Any of them could have PTSD, and that's post-traumatic stress syndrome. And it might be that they have PTSD, and that's why they think they have ADHD. It could be that they have OCD, but that is married to, believe it or not, their ADHD, right? So OCD is obsessive compulsive disorder. But the big part is the parents of these children or the adults in our society who are dealing with these neurodevelopmental disorders, they also have to deal with these other things, sleep disorders, that's, so I just want to encourage people to think about what it must mean to be that person or to be those parents, right? We actually don't really have a lot of great supports in this particular area. All right, I did want to talk about, for a lot of people, ADHD or ADD is pretty relevant. And to be honest, there's a number of us who would have not really known about this when we were kids, but as adults, we might identify with it. The new terminology is actually, instead of this ADHD and ADD, they actually call it hyperactive ADHD or inattentive ADHD, right? So ADHD kind of still holds. So the hyperactive kind is the kid that falls off the chair in class, or the people who have to move all the time. They're prone to impulsive behaviors. They might interrupt conversations. That hyperactive is, it's almost like it spills out physically as well as within the brain. Inattentive ADHD is a little different. So we refer to it now as inattentive ADHD, prone to forgetfulness. They might struggle with organization. These are people who do not make a list and follow it. They just don't. They go from one item to another, unless it's something that they are so interested in. And when that happens, they forget everything else in the world and they are singularly focused on building the Lego spaceship, right? They're not going to even hear you when you say come to dinner or something. As an adult, inattentive ADHD people are fabulous for companies that need detailed work, for people in labs that need repetitive things done over and over, done well and meticulously, right? So that can actually be an advantage in certain jobs. But I just wanted to get that definition done. The other thing is, I just wanted to show some brain scans for for a lot of people. They might feel that the diagnosis ADHD or ADD is, just one more construct of the world that we've decided that we're going to label people. People that truly have ADHD or ADD, and I'm not saying it's not overdiagnosed, I'm just saying people who really have it, there is actual changes in their brain and how their brain fires in their brain chemistry. So it's not something to take lightly. And sometimes just the understanding of it can change how we interact with the world. I thought this was kind of interesting. This is an integrated model of ADHD. And this is just giving you the breadth of the different types of people that might fall under the ADHD, ADD umbrella. So in a desert, so somebody who is understimulated because they have low dopamine, they're going to be interest-based focused. They probably will have memory issues, and they're stimulation seeking. So they are looking for adrenaline. They're looking, addictions end up here because low dopamine means we're not getting that feel good feeling. Our brain is not producing it. We don't have enough of it. And so we seek that out. And believe it or not, I hate to say it, but there's plenty of drugs and alcohol that mimic dopamine, and so it's going to make somebody feel better. Missing conductor, I like this. So less dominant executive function. I actually have one of these. One of my kids is absolutely this guy. Reduced self-control, right? They're busy. Their thoughts are busy. They have a ton of things going on in their brain. They are very in the moment. They struggle with future reward activation. They are procrastinators. They want to live in the moment. They love having the feel of a million things going on, but they're not productive. They get stuck trying to finish a task. And we would call them a maverick. They know rules. They don't want to have rules. They don't think that they want to have rules. My particular one, it's not that he doesn't have morals, but the feeling of being adrift, like I don't want to conform to the rest of the world. That's this missing conductor. That's how that ADHD plays out for somebody with a less dominant effective executive function. And the seeing patterns. So this is more dominant right brain functions. Sometimes we see these seeing patterns with our ASD kids as well. So our autistic spectrum disorders. But this version of ADHD and ADD is they recognize patterns. These are your math whizzes. Math is patterns. So when you can recognize patterns well, your math is fabulous. They are intuitive. Um, they are knowledge seeking. They're creative. They're verbal, but they're also perfectionists. And they tend to be a little more emotional. That sensitivity, they're unstructured, they're passionate, but they can be sensitive um, to criticism, right? That might actually completely set them off and make them not want to engage anymore. So that's the ADHD model. And um, this is what it looks like in preschool, school age, adolescent, but I wanted to look at adulthood. So they say mood instability. Part of that could be the low dopamine. It could be what neurological developmental issue is causing the ADHD or the ADD. Low self-esteem typically comes from them not being able to reach goals that they set. Relationship problems, if they haven't accepted that they might have a developmental disorder, that can lead to issues with relationships. If I if I'm low dopamine and I'm always looking for my next big high, then if my partner doesn't know what I'm looking for or what I need or why I need to go and ride mountain bikes on, crazy terrain, that can cause problems. Increased road and occupational incidents. That is true. Difficulty planning, completing tasks, alcohol, substance misuse, inconsistent parenting style. Often, what I have seen is college age is where a lot of my ADHD, ADD kind of people start to recognize that they have a problem. And when we talk about academic failure, these are kids who are so smart that they can get through high school without studying, but all of a sudden they hit college and they are falling behind, right? So that's a big deal. Moving on to autism spectrum disorder, ASD is what it's called. This is a developmental disability caused by differences in the brain. And it's a spectrum because it can go from severe disability all the way to extreme ability. And I just put there's two TV shows that are out there, Atypical and The Good Doctor, and they talk a lot about they show these very high functioning autistic people who maybe have issues with socialization and relationships, but otherwise excel in language, excel uh, in knowledge base. But the truth is, there's just as many, if not more, autistic spectrum kids who live in that severe disability to moderate disability, where they're nonverbal. A lot of autistic kids are nonverbal, and they're going to grow up into adults that are nonverbal. But we do have some new things to help our ASD individuals. So I just wanted to point out that they are not all the same. It is a spectrum. They can be all over it. They are not all exceptionally intellectual or artistic. Rain Man, The Good Doctor, not really the norm. They can be, but not the norm. Of lower intelligence. So autism is not actually directly linked to intelligence. So even a nonverbal autistic adult, they might use an iPad. They can understand everything that you're saying to them. They might just not be able to verbalize to you. Non-communicative, we go back to this. It's not that they don't want to communicate. They're going to either need sign language or a tool if they are on the nonverbal scale. Uncaring or disinterested in relationships. That is just not true. They don't always detect body language or read between the lines, but the emotions are there. They feel happiness, sadness, everything in between, and they want to engage with others, just like the rest of us. They want to engage. They're not all unsuccessful. Many are graduate high school, go to college, get jobs, typical American dream stuff. But there are going to be some who the achievement might be that they can hold down a job 3 days a week, or that they can volunteer at a community farm and do a great job. So the whole idea of this spectrum is we want everybody to be able to achieve to their highest level and to feel like they are part of a community. And I just wanted to show you, this is what's going on in the brain. So if you just look at social communication comprehension, if you look the typical pattern, all of the spikes are hitting in about the same area. They might be different levels, but they're about the same area. So look what's happening to an ASD person, the limbic circuit. So remember, neurons are electrical signals in our brain. So the ASD circuit is out of alignment. When it's out of alignment like that, an ASD individual is going to have trouble reading your cues. They're going to have trouble reading, that I'm really angry or I'm very surprised. That they might have to be told that I am really surprised, right? They're not going to pick it up, whereas somebody without this disorder would pick it up. I just wanted to mention that there's some very concerning trends, and we can discuss a little bit what we think why this is. But from 1997 to 2019, ADHD has increased from 6.3 to 9.9. Percentage of boys having a learning disability has gone up to 10.1%. So that means 1 out of 10. One out of every 10 is going to have a learning disability. We see higher learning disability rates for children living below the poverty level compared to those living at or above the poverty level. So when we're talking about inner city schools and possibly what we call in Massachusetts, like I think they're chapter 1 schools, but schools where there's a lot of free lunches, if they're below the poverty level and they have double the amount of children needing services because of a learning disability, they literally do need 2 times the amount of funds typically than a school that's not at poverty level. So we can show that either it's lead where they're living, or something that has to do with their food insecurity, or possibly, again, developmental issues during the time that they were in utero or early years. But we see there is a correlation when you run the numbers. There's also reported autism was about 4 times higher in boys than girls. That has been, I think, across the board, but we are more likely to see something along the autism spectrum for a boy. A lot of what we try to do with this is help families thrive. So we try to link health, school, and community with the parents. We want to reduce parent stress as much as we can. Access community services, improve communication. I can tell you that's always the goal. There's never enough in-home support staff. Integrated medicine and treatments, there's only a few places that do it well. And so what you find is that the parent's stress level, that little green box, is 95% of what's here usually. And they feel disconnected from school. They feel disconnected from their health teams. And respite care. There is little to no respite care anymore for parents who have even grown children who are on the lower level of the autism spectrum, or intellectual disabilities, or learning disabilities. To not have respite care is a big deal. When you have a 17-year-old who, who still wears a diaper and needs to be changed once in a while, that without respite care, parents are going to burn out, and we don't do group homes very much anymore for these neurodevelopmental disorders. And so this is the kind of the new model that people are talking about, research and practice, and they talk about the F words, the 5 F words. So in order to have everybody live their best life, we're going to work on fitness, we're going to work on their functioning. We want them to feel like they can function in our society and they can do things and be successful. Friends, participate. Special Olympics is one of the great things that have come about over the last many years. So it's a great way to improve fitness and to create friendships. Family, believe it or not, environmental factors like family is huge. They need families need extended families to help them out. They need to create family relationships within their community, but also our our NDD kids, our neurodevelopmental disorder kids, need to feel like they are secure and part of a family. And then personal factors, this fun. We all want to have fun. And honestly, as we move towards the future, that's really these 5 F's are what everybody's striving to create for our NDDs. This was just an interesting study, I thought. This was a model that was developed during COVID. And you hope that they would continue the support model, but this idea of family-centered telemedicine, that you have a parent side, a child side, and then you worry about short-term stuff, but you also are always looking at the long-term benefits. The Up till now, telemedicine was not really used for this population. It's been critical for us to be able to include family-centered telemedicine, because this is when parents start to feel an increased sense of agency, an increased sense of self-efficiency. They feel like there's partners with them. Without that, they feel very burnt out. So it's kind of a big deal. And I just had pictures of different kids signing, things like that. And, that's the end of this presentation. We'll go to questions and answers, but I am Reliable RN. I do have different services that are available if anybody needs it. And I'm just going to stop my share. And I just have a question for people who are on. Does anybody want to share? Do you have somebody who lives on this spectrum, or in the ADHD world, or has other neurodevelopmental issues?
Yeah, so I have, and it's interesting because ADHD appears to be quite genetic in our family, or I should say, it's a generational thing. I've seen it in my own life. My mom, I have a child. I have nephews and nieces who all seem to have carried that trait through. And interesting as an adult to be, diagnosed basically as an adult with ADD, or, and through all the years of, childhood, whatever, just thinking that you're just dumb because you can't focus on what's going on.
Right.
But then learning as you get older to kind of adjust to, this is the way it is, to compensate, and you learn to compensate as you get older. But as a child, it is with no services, it is a tough thing. So it's great that there are more services out there for children. And I also worked in a school system with autistic children, and they are fascinating children. Fascinating.
They are. Yeah.
So.
I definitely think that I think there is always a focus on the negative for these neurodevelopmental, because we even, and there's been talked, like we call them disorders, right? But there's really, like, we could call them neurodevelopmental differences, right? Instead, because it just might be a little different. I can tell you, my daughter, I had her tested in 3rd grade. I would have thought she was dyslexic. They said she wasn't. And as soon as she got to college in Ireland, they're like, you're totally dyslexic. But you're right. We changed everything for her. School never graded her spelling. I got her a special book to learn math because she was actually dyslexic with numbers more than she was with reading. She was an excellent reader, but numbers. So if she got the answer right here, but then copied it wrong here, she got credit for here. But you had to talk to everybody about it. And it was like, I saw a change in who she was when she felt validated that somebody actually said, yes, it is dyslexia. It's not just that you're bad at spelling. And again, it didn't really change anything except a perception that there's nothing wrong with you. you simply have a different way of looking at the world. Your brain works differently than mine, you know?
Right. Yeah. I completely agree with that. My daughter as well. And when she ended up they actually put her on a plan, which only gave her more time, but her math skills were. And I remember her saying to me, it's so nice to know I'm just not stupid. Because they said, no, you're from learning certain things. And again, it built her self-esteem, her confidence, and she found that she could go into a field where she didn't need the skills that she really struggled with, and has done, wonderfully in her life with the areas that she was stronger in.
Yeah. I have no doubt that I have a nephew who is ASD. He's on the autism spectrum disorder. However, he's on that very high functioning level. So he taught himself how to play the piano better than Billy Joel can play the piano. He when he's not at work doing the financial stuff, which is great because he is meticulous, he writes symphonies. He writes symphonies. I'm like, you do what? And it's amazing. Like it's like incredible to watch him, and you think, I think Mozart was deaf. Like, the thing is, what we call a deficit, in some ways can sometimes be a gift. But it's a gift of other. And somehow, especially in this current environment, being different is hard, especially as kids. It's hard.
Well, I wonder if sometimes it's a bad school system. Oh, we're not performing, therefore our kids have learning disabilities. Except when you take that same kid and you put him in a different school, they do well.
True, but so if you think about it, Craig, so if the school, right? So, and this is very true. When we asked the school to tailor the learning to Kaylee, she excelled, right? So when she moved to a school that was more, when she went to Minuteman, and so it was more hands-on and less sit and listen to a lecture and write, she flourished. So you're right, Craig. I had 4 children, and honestly, they went to 4 different high schools, and each one needed a different. So you're right. As parents, are we good about taking that step and saying, "Uh-oh, the way this school operates is not in line with how my child learns." And thank God we had the luxury of that. So imagine an inner city school where it's a parent who maybe cannot transport somewhere else and can't even get busing to somewhere else and certainly can't afford somewhere else. So now they're stuck in a school that's teaching their child in a way that does not work for that child. That is beyond frustrating. I can't, I mean, it drives me out of my mind. But I think you're right that it does depend on how they're taught and who's doing it.
But it's also so difficult, again, working in the school system to cater to all these many different learning styles. And it's really hard in a public school for a teacher with 25 kids, and 15 of them learn this way, and then there's 10 this way, and 5 and then individual. The school is not set up for it, so it is difficult for children who have a little bit more difficulty being in the norm to really be able to excel in those types of situations. It's a shame, because most kids who, a lot of kids who don't do well in the public school system, and my nephew is one of them, did terrible. He's found his niche and did go to college, barely made it through college, but found something he loved, and he has done amazing in his life. But school was not the right, the public school system just was not the right setting for him. But they couldn't change what the school system does, which is basically you sit all day long. There's a lot of kids out there that just can't sit all day long. Most
That's
kids
right,
can't,
right.
but we force. So that's a
I
hard
even
thing.
I
That's
even
a hard
remember
thing.
I even remember, Bev, when I was in first grade, and I know that they don't do it anymore, and I don't know why this was considered like a bad thing, or it's a bad thing now. In first grade, there were a couple, probably 4 or 5 of us that were really good readers, who would, during certain reading classes, go out into the hallway with a kid who not a good reader. And we would sit
Yeah.
and they would read and it was like this co-learning. And I loved reading with my buddy. I never saw it as, oh, they're stupid, so I'm going to help them. But I'm sure maybe that's what it came across to some or whatever. But I think when you take that opportunity away for teachers to like use other kids in the class to kind of, be that extra. But I definitely know it's become like taboo. Everybody's got to be in the same, like, together, and it just doesn't work that way. So, but the other thing is, Bev, I think the idea that adults are starting to recognize, we have a whole array of adults who are autism spectrum disorder. They just happen to be high functioning, but they carry some of the same highly regulated, almost OCD mentality. Like they're highly focused. Things have to be just so. They have to be perfect. And it's not so much that they need a label, but sometimes I think that what the label helps with is their partner's understanding. But
I agree.
All right.
It's
I
a tough
lost
thing.
one.
I mean,
That's
it's a
okay.
tough thing. Craig said
Yeah,
he
yeah.
had to
It's
go.
true. Yeah, I know that you're right. That's okay. It is time to go for all of us. So that's okay. I'm actually going to stop the recording then. And thank you so much. I'm glad you came on, Bev. Thanks, Kathleen, and Craig just jumped off. But I think I just wanted to have this topic, even to have it recorded, so that when I work with parents, I can shift them over to here. So that's one of the reasons we do these recordings when I do the online classes. So thank you so much for agreeing